legalizing drugs, it's starting to happen, but even establishment mediums like The Economist and pretty much anyone with a brain and not a political or financial agenda knows that it would be better for society to legalize drugs.
So here's
nobody really wants to talk about the financial cost of putting 80% of your prison population nonviolent offenders. Who pays for that and why?
Right.
Right.
So here's my question. I mean, just to be very clear, are you saying legalize all drugs is what you think could be a good option?
I would argue for that.
Portugal has done that. I'm pretty sure it's Portugal that they have all drugs legal, and they have like the lowest drug problem, and the drug problem they do have, it's not treated like, by law enforcement. It's a public health issue.
Sure.
That's what it is to begin with, a public health issue.
Well, why is an alcoholic viewed one way, but someone who likes to smoke crack viewed a different way? You know what I mean?
Or pot.
Or pot. Well, yeah, that's even worse.
I mean, so I should preface this by saying that generally I happen to agree with you. But to play devil's advocate, I mean, what about things like PCP, right? Where it's like such a dangerous drug where somebody feels no pain and will go absolutely crazy and just like go out of their minds. I mean, should we still legalize that, or is that something where you feel, well, I'll let you.
Steve's got the helm.
I think that's where this becomes a gray area, because in an ideal world, all drugs should be legal, but people should be responsible enough and not so fear-based and conditioned and wanting to escape from their life so much that they would resort to destroying their life with drugs. So we're trying to transition to there. Hopefully everyone wants to transition to there. But in that process, we're going to have to go through that gray area where we might have to still keep some legislation, maybe, like maybe for things like PCP, until we get to that point where people could make their own decisions, so everyone would actually love themselves and not want to use that type of escapism. But my opinion is that all drugs should be legal.
And I'll go off that. The government already makes the most dangerous drugs out there. So PCP, yeah, that's bad. I mean, so is meth and all that. But when you take the drugs off the street and you make it legal, like the drugs I've tried is because I went to a sketchy guy for weed, and that sketchy guy was like, "Here, you want to try this on top of that?" And I was like, "Okay, why not?" Like, it was there, we'd party, and I would try something I wanted to. Now, is that the case for everything? No. But if you take the drugs off the street, just like the cartels right now, they're already losing a ton of profit with just the 2 states that have legalized weed. So you start killing the profit, gangs aren't going to have the weapons, they're not going to have, the influence that they have over these poor communities, and these drugs that are tearing these communities apart, along other things, possibly might have the chance to start climbing up the social ladder.
And I think, for example, pot and alcohol, I think, are, just specific examples where we have these drugs that are, becoming legal or are not illegal right now. And just being able to take those and say, okay, if we legalize these, it doesn't really matter as far as people's access. Most people, I would say, even, if they really wanted marijuana, they could probably get it. Not everyone, but I'd say most people, especially over the age of 18, which is how it would be where it is legalized. So I definitely agree. I don't know if I fully agree that the most dangerous drugs are legalized, but I would say that, it's tough to say. It's if you're talking about all these drugs and you listen to the side effects of pharmaceuticals on these commercials, it's like, Jesus.
And that's only ones they say.
But things like heroin and PCP, those are brutal drugs. But I guess my argument would be, if you want to legalize them and put age restrictions so that people can understand the world a little bit before they get there, that I can go for. If I'm 18, and I have access to heroin or PCP, I'm not doing it. Like, I've learned about the world. I've figured it out enough at that point that I'm like, holy cow, heck no am I doing it, So I think if we legalize it and put a little bit of regulation around it, although I'm generally anti-regulation, but I mean, I think I understand the argument that something that dangerous under the, without really knowing what you're doing, if you're a 13-year-old and someone's like, hey, you want heroin, that's probably not a good situation. But, I think if you put some regulation around it and some restrictions, it might be all right. I don't know.
Where regulation would fail, one of my points on PCP would be, is people are always changing the molecular structure and compounds of drugs. Just like with performance-enhancing drugs with athletes, they're always ahead of the testing. You try to keep a drug illegal. They're on to the next thing. Yeah, and most of the things today, sorry, but a client that I had in business who had a ton of warehouses around this country, PCP was a big issue because of the financial incentives they gave these people to do things fast and have to lift a lot of weight and do it over and over. So PCP was being used amongst a lot of the workers. Now people do Adderall and turn to pharmaceuticals. So yeah, I don't know.
I think it's less about legislation and more about cutting out the demand for it. So it's just a symptom of the society we live in today, in my opinion.
But what about a lot of the suppliers have also been our own government in many cases?
Yeah.
That's why it's more of a fundamental shift, and that's just a symptom of it. So ultimately, it's going to start with pretty much a shift in consciousness of the individual before the society in general makes that shift. Because if everyone switches to self-love and that's perpetuated and that's the paradigm instead of this fearful victim mentality escapism paradigm, no one is going to want to do PCP or heroin. It's a symptom of the society, and we can't patch up the glass after it's broken. We got to prevent the glass from breaking in the first place.
I mean, I would definitely agree. And by the way, I think what we should do with this is the person that's talking next, not if I take this, I'm automatically talking currently. Anyways, but what I was going to say is I think that along those same lines, I agree that it is a symptom of our society, but I think the problem is shift, and this is the debate I always think about when I think about libertarianism and things like that, is the shift, the really abrupt shift from where we are now to legalizing really dangerous drugs and things like that, or cutting out certain government programs, whatever it is. I mean, I guess the point is, if you're making this really abrupt shift, that can be really, really rough. And stealing the show. And if you make this really abrupt shift, then that is really causing a lot of short-term problems. And granted, they are short-term, but it can be serious problems. I mean, people suddenly legalizing all this stuff and saying, okay, well, it's legalized, and although it is a symptom of our society, we currently have those symptoms of our society. And the fact that, living in the cubicle cultures, we'll call it, I mean, that is not going away anytime soon, for sure. I mean, it
is. Robotics.
But yeah, that's what I was saying before, making that transition, that's the tricky part.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna watch time. Just Master Moderator.
Time's an illusion.
Yes, and technically John has the Buddha.
Yeah, I know. Geez, so rude. But no, I mean, I was just gonna add, yeah, it'll cause temporary problems. And the thing is, things generally get worse before they have to get better. But you go in not most people, but you go in a lot of medicine cabinets across America nowadays, and what do you find? Prescription painkillers. I know more people who fucked their life up from prescription painkillers and gone down the rabbit hole than a lot of other drugs.
Symptoms for that, and symptoms of that. And
so, it all goes back to, like you were saying. But that's all I had. Just wanted to.
I have turmeric in my cabinet.
Boom.
Dude.
There it is.
Do you need help?